This is the formal start of the Desktop Publishing Pioneer Meeting. It's May 22nd, 2017, and we're at the Computer History Museum in Mountain View, California. We appreciate all of you taking time from your very busy schedules to come here and join us. This particular meeting is co-sponsored by the Software Industry Special Interest Group. Mike Humphreys and Ann Hardy are the co-chairs of that now. And it's also co-sponsored by the Center for Software History. David Brock is the director of that. And the meeting would not have been possible, and I have to acknowledge this, as Jonathan Seybold. He was the person who, if I couldn't have gotten him, I don't think I would have done the meeting. And he's been of inestimable help, as well as a pain in the ass. Please keep that off the tape. But seriously, and all the logistics. Where's Ed LaHaye? Is he here? There he is. Ed LaHaye did all the logistics and mechanics of working with the people here at the museum, as well as David working with them to get this lovely setup. This auditorium yesterday had about 250 chairs set up in it. And yesterday afternoon, they broke that all down, set this up, and the guys worked, I don't know how late. They even wanted to set it up so that each of your faces would show up properly on the camera, and that took a lot of time. Exact lighting for each one of you. Terrific work. Doug Jerger is here somewhere. And Doug, it's hard to tell, it's hard to see him. Doug is also here to help us. He's been a long time there. He's the gentleman, if you have materials to contribute, either now or wish to do so, we'd like to collect whatever you've got before you throw it away. We've lost so much that people said, oh, nobody be interested. We're interested, trust me. So paper materials, artifacts, things, pictures, things like that. Pictures have to have the names associated with them. Just empty pictures are not very useful anymore. We also have a couple of computer historians. I see one here with Matthew Kirschenbaum, and Thomas Haig will also be joining us. And of course, David is one, and Hanson Sue is one, and there's some pseudo-historians here like Dave Walden. He doesn't have a degree, but he works like one, and he writes as many references as every historian I've ever seen. 13 pages of references, 2 pages of text. It's great. We're also hoping to produce a special issue of the Annals of the History of Computing based upon this. Matthew volunteered to lead that. We've done 6 of them so far on our special subjects that we've done on spreadsheets and on the desktop published, not the things that Charles Simone works on with word processing, things of that sort, and a number of others. And these are special. We have both historians and some of you, we hope, will write articles for that special issue. And Dave has volunteered to help as a longtime worker with the Annals. And of course, I'd be remiss, again, this was provided to me, I'd be remiss if I didn't give special thanks to the Computer History Museum. They've not only been generous in hosting the meeting, but they've been all the administrative help and operational assistance. Poppy Harrelson, who was out there greeting you and getting you signed in, just done so much of the stuff to make this work and work well. They're doing the video recording, and there is actually one behind me. They claim they want to take pictures of David and me, which I think is a total waste of time, but that's their call. They're also having a special dinner, which I think all of you have been invited to this evening, and I hope you'll be able to attend. There's a reception, and then the dinner, and then the museum is open, which they usually isn't on Monday and Tuesday, right?
Correct.
So they've opened it specially. They've dusted off all the artifacts, so they'll be clean when you take a look at them. I saw the people in here this morning dusting.
Bug them, too?
Oh.
Bug them.
I thought he was pointing to me to go move. I wasn't really ready to do that. Let's keep going. The purpose of this meeting, as you can guess, is to get your recollections as best you remember of what happened. Historians don't say this is not a Bible, this is not a primary resource, but it leads them to others. There's already been 2 books written and many articles based upon the stuff we've collected over the last 15, 16 years. And this will also provide them. What books will come out of it and who will do them, don't know. But what you say gives them leads. And we have found for the pioneer meetings that the interaction among you, you remember it one way, you remember it a different way. You thought the other guy was cheating. He thought that you were. We had that when we were doing the relational database meeting. Can you imagine the discussions between Oracle and Informix and those people and the signs they had up here in the valley? And it was wonderful to get that interaction. Same thing when we had the people with VisiCalc, the two people, Faustra and the guys who did the work, Frankson and Kick. They were there, and they just said, hey, that's not the way it was. And that's what you have with this kind of interaction. It's not a nice, friendly panel discussion or an interview where it's just you. It's what you're saying to each other. Today, the focus, we've broken it down into two sections. Today is primarily technology. We're focusing on where the technology came from, where things were at the beginning, what changed, what were the key elements that made the change take place. And some of you who were there in the 60s, 70s, you made that happen. And then in the 80s, a great explosion took place of the technology. We want to explore that today in some depth. And then tomorrow, for some of you, it may be an unusual hat to put on. It's called a business hat. For some of you, you made a lot of money out of it. Some of you couldn't care less. You worked in academia and things like that. But we're going to look through the businesses, how they were created, how they were financed, what they did, what their markets were, how they changed. And the companies, of course, I'm looking there, you know, the Adobe and Aldus and so forth. These are wonderful stories to tell. And Ventura, these are all good stories in frame and so forth. So that's what we'll do tomorrow. On Tuesday, we're going to do two other special things tomorrow. One, we're going to give Jonathan Seybold a chance to talk a little bit about why he created the publications and the conferences. And we're going to ask you, though, more important, what effect they had on you. What was the impact? Were they as useful as he tells me they were, or were they just, you know, incidental to the growth of the industry? We'll be fascinated in that. He claims he was the glue that held you all together, but, you know, I'm suspicious of those kinds of claims at times. Oh, I may have lost him. That may be it. And the thing we're going to do at the end, we're focusing, remember, mostly on what's happened 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. A lot has happened since then. So, but that's not our purpose. History has to be at least 15 years old, I was told by my historian friends. So, but the last session is, so what's happened since then? Where have we gone? What are the changes? And where do you see things going in the future? So that's a chance for you to pontificate. Is that an appropriate word? Mr. Trump isn't there yet, but maybe we can pontificate a little bit today. Folders have just a couple of items that if you want to open them up now, and just some odds and ends of rules as you look at them. One, if you have any side talk, these mics are very sensitive. They're going to pick it up, and our transcriptions will be messed up. Remember, the idea here is to get good transcriptions so we have record of what you said. So please do avoid the side talk. Number two, something that David taught me from the last meeting we ran, is that don't interrupt. If you have something you want to say and it's urgent, put your hand up. David will make a note of the fact that you want to talk, and we'll call on you next time. I can shut off any mic that I want to. So if some of you are going on too long and starts to bug me, you're toast, just remember. Can all of you hear okay? Any problems anywhere? Because we've used this room a long time ago. They set up this time with speakers coming that way, not just recording here, which has been very helpful. So in your folders, we have a copy of the program, which you all had seen before in various emails we sent you. This is the latest version. We're going to follow that. I won't say religiously, but we'll follow it pretty much. If some topics are getting better, we want to stay with them, we'll push back some times. If they're not getting anywhere, we may just shorten it up a little. So we're flexible in that regard. We're not limited to what's here or what we ask. You guys bring in the things. You ask questions, you bring in topics. Some will say, hey, let's postpone that to a later session. Don't jump ahead to there. We're doing it somewhat chronologically, so don't jump too far ahead on that kind of thing. I mentioned about the oral recording. We talked about the transcript. Everything that's done here will be transcribed, edited, to get rid of things that, the ums and ers and things like that that don't add to it, to make it readable. So there'll be 12 sessions, and they'll all be posted on the Computer History website at some time in the future. I don't guarantee how soon. It takes a lot of time and effort to do a reasonable job of editing. For those people on the outside, where the cameras won't see their names, when you speak, and you're more than entitled to participate, do say your name before you start. There's mics at both ends on the outside for you to use when you talk on that. Please do, though. So that's it. We're going to start the following way. I'm going to go around the room. I think I'm starting with Chuck Bigelow for some reason. But you're going to go around the room and have asked you to give a very, and I mean a very brief introduction. We do want to get done by round 10. We primarily want you to mention what your connection is to desktop publishing, to the technology or to the business side, and keep it in the 2-minute range. For those of you who weren't involved like me, it'll even be shorter. What else? I think many of you know each other, but there's some of you who don't, because I saw some of you saying, I've heard your name, but I've never actually met you. So you can see who they are by the tent cards that are there. So let me start with myself. I had a 30-minute introduction, and David thought that was a little inappropriate. Since I have no relationship to the field, that's it. I'm Burt Grad. I was co-chair of the Software Industry Special Interest Group, along with Luann Johnson, who was my partner in doing this for the last 16 years. And we dropped out in 2015 as co-chairs, and Mike and Ann took over at that point in time. I've been in the computer software field since 1954, when I was with General Electric, and worked on the UNIVAC 1 in Louisville, Kentucky. It was the first commercial computer with the manufacturing control program. As I was just telling someone, it took me 3 months to write the program and 3 months to debug it. I had a whole computer to myself every evening from 5 p.m. till about 11 o'clock at night. I then went with 18 years with IBM in a variety of development roles, a whole range of software applications, and then as a consultant to software companies from 1978 to 2008. And I was then fired by my clients, who all said I was too old because I didn't know anything about, and they were right, about what they were doing anymore. And I do continue. As you can see, we collect software history, and I still love doing it. And I work for my son, who has a life insurance agency in New York City. I'm his CFO. David, it's your turn.
Well, very briefly, I'm the director of the Center for Software History here at the museum. I'm an historian of technology. I've worked primarily in the history of the semiconductor industry, and my move into the history of software is relatively new, but I've had some very able guides in that introduction, some of whom are sitting around the table. I guess I would describe my acquaintance with the topic of today as well-versed enough to know my ignorance about it, but very much looking forward to the discussion.
And now we're going to start with the real participants. Chuck Bigelow.
Chuck Bigelow. For the sins of my youth, I was sentenced to 35 years as a college professor, and along the way I was interested in typography, and especially as it became digital. So I wrote a series of articles for the Seybold report, with Jonathan Seybold edited and co-wrote with the first one with me. And that was a very exciting moment because people were trying to understand how the digital typography would affect traditional typography. Donald Knuth, who's here, also invited me to come to Stanford to be a professor of digital typography in the early 80s. I was happy to work with him because I also had read his papers and met him at a conference organized by the Seybolds at Stanford in the 1980, I think it was, or maybe 80, yeah, 80. So it's a pleasure to be reunited with them. And later I was early on a typographic consultant, but not an employee of Adobe when they were first starting out, so I see my colleagues over there. And I taught at Stanford for several years and then made fonts commercially for Adobe, Microsoft, Apple, and other firms. And after retiring, I was called back to be a professor again. I guess I misbehaved as a retiree, and so I ended my career as teaching at the Rochester Institute of Technology as a distinguished professor of graphic arts.
Thank you, Chuck. Brainerd?
Paul Brainerd from Seattle. My background actually comes out of the editorial and photography. I'm the fourth generation of photographers in my family, and that's how I got interested in journalism and publishing, going back to high school when I was editor of the high school yearbook. And then in college, I started to get involved with production of the newspaper, and so I think my start on this would be about 1968 or 69 when I bought CompuGraphic equipment and went to cold type and started working with offset printing. But I saw the whole transition between hot metal and composition and cold type on the production side. In 1984, we started Aldus Corporation. I got fired from my previous job at Atex that Richard will be accounting for later. Eastman Kodak Company had purchased Atex, and they laid off all the engineers and all the advanced development of microcomputer technology in Redmond, Washington. So I had my pick of 20 or so engineers, and we started a new company called Aldus and coined the term desktop publishing. And then 10 years later, sold the company to Chuck and John, and served on the Adobe board for a couple of years.
Thank you. Just a small thing. These mics are very sensitive. You do not have to sit forward. They're very comfortable when you sit back there. Can you hear me anymore? Next, Liz, and she's known as Liz Bond to many of you, but Liz Cruz, who's here with us now.
Good morning. I want to thank Jonathan particularly for including me in this event, and David and Bert too for your asking me to join you today. I'm Liz Cruz, and I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I currently spend my retirement as a passionate advocate for 5 of the New Mexico history museums, and also with the International Folk Art Alliance. I work as a fiber artist, I'm a watercolor painter, and I'm trying to become a better bridge player. That's Liz Cruz. What you remember me as Liz Bond, and that was when I think you will remember my time at Xerox and Adobe and desktop publishing days. My connection to desktop publishing started in the late 70s and the early 80s. Working in Xerox Electro-Optical Systems in Pasadena, I was assigned to introduce technology solutions to the Xerox Education Group companies. This included developing publishing systems for 2 of their educational publishing companies. Some of my PARC friends will remember that we took Alto-based computers and some of your PARC tools and developed publishing systems, for example, for the University Microfilm's publishing of a dissertation abstracts international. From EOS, I moved on to manage the Xerox Font Center, Corporate Font Center, for the Xerox Printing Systems Division. When we talk about the first electronic printers fonts, I have some real interesting stories to share with you about making 300 DPI fonts for the first electronic printers, particularly regarding the industry, the insurance industry. As manager of the Xerox Corporate Font Center, I developed relationships with typographers and type foundries and type designers, and I grew a great appreciation for fine typography. Gertrude and Herman Zoff gave me a wonderful hand-printed piece with an alphabet and a quote that I believe is still true today. Whence did come that beautiful magic art of painting speech and speaking to the eyes? The most memorable time for me in desktop publishing was when I joined Adobe. And through my relationship with Mergenthaler Monotype, and ITC, we helped develop and negotiate the first font licensing agreements and contracts for Adobe. And as director of their marketing and communication, I helped build their graphic arts marketing communication staff and their relationships and with public relations and advertising for the company in the beginning years. As I look back, I remember 2 pieces of advice that I think impacted my role in bringing desktop publishing to the market. From Aaron Burns, president of International Typeface Corporation, you never have a second opportunity to make a first impression. And from John Warnock and Chuck Geschke, if you're passionate about doing it, then just go do it. So from desktop published newsletters in black and white and corporate marketing materials, we had the beginning of desktop publishing. we've really come a long ways. And I wanted to show you, for example. A couple of years ago, I published on my desktop machine this book. So, all in color, with an enormous number of color pictures, and paying an awfully lot of attention to its typographic setting, balancing its columns, and things that one would probably never imagine when we first started doing desktop publishing. So we've come a long ways, baby.
Thank you, Liz. Dr. Donald Knuth. Do I pronounce it correctly?
Knuth. Okay, so I guess I'm the other academic on this panel. I came in a way, I have a little ink in my veins because my father had a hobby, but he actually did a lot of work in Milwaukee area for churches and high schools and things like this. So we had an offset printing machine in our basement by the time I was in high school. And I actually worked between my senior and year in high school and my freshman year in college. There was a company in Milwaukee called Hassler Printing Company, which actually was mimeograph. But I ran the Hassler Printing Company for
How do you
3
spell
months.
that, Donald?
What?
How do you spell the company name?
H-A-S with one S, L-E-R.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so I had some experience with things like this. Also, my high school newspaper, machine.
Being
Listen.
picked up now.
So, but other than that, my experience with this thing came because I was writing books about computer science, and so I read a lot of galley proofs, and so I saw a lot of things, so 1977, I guess it was, there was a crisis about my books. Namely, the printing industry had given up on hot metal type. My books had a lot of mathematics in it. Mathematics was not treated as a goal of printing industry. It was always considered penalty copy. And so when they switched over from metal type to optical type, and then the mathematics got the shaft, I mean, there was no interest in, and so the galley proofs that I got for the second edition of my book on algorithms looked so bad it made me want to quit, and it had anyway. Stanford Library has a copy of the galley proofs, and you can see why I was. Okay, so I was despondent, but I learned in February of 1977. I learned of the existence of a machine at Los Angeles.
A little closer to the mic in your case.
Okay. So anyway, I learned about digital, that it was possible to have, to use digital devices and have something actually that comes out looking like a book. And it wasn't just an imitation of a book, but it could actually do as well as a real printing press. And within a week, I scheduled a trip to Southern California to look at the machine and so on, and I changed my plan. I was going to spend my sabbatical year in South America, learning Spanish and writing more books, but instead I stayed here and decided to write computer programs that were going to try to put my books into a form that I could accept. So I figured it would take about a year, and I developed a system that was originally going to be just for my secretary and myself, for writing books. Okay, well, I'm talking too long, so I took my sabbatical and went up to Stanford's Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, and other people kept coming into my office saying, "What are you doing, Don?" And I showed them, and they got interested. So Guy Steele ported my system to MIT early on, and so I went through a period where I had one user of the system, then I had 10 users, then I had 100 users, then I had 1,000 users. Each time, it had to change a little bit, or a lot. And it took me more than a year, but eventually, as Chuck said, I started a program at Stanford about digital typography. This was in the early 80s, I think 90, I'm not sure when it became official, 1980 or 81. It was, Chuck won the MacArthur Prize 1 week after he had accepted our offer. And okay, so we had a bunch of excellent students who went on to distinguished careers, mostly at Adobe, I think. And during this program, I brought a lot of the main people working in fonts to Stanford to work with the student. Okay, so I just wanted to, while I think of it, one more thing, and that is one of the strong things that I was thinking about at that time was that I'd seen a lot of cases where engineers would come and say, okay, computers are here now, it's all a new world, let's start out from scratch and redo everything right. By contrast, I wanted to look at everything that had been written about typography since Gutenberg and not throw it out, but see what there was in it that we could learn. And Stanford has a wonderful library and collection about materials about fine books, and so that was one of the guiding points in here. I wanted to tie what I was doing to the past and not throw it out like a lot of other people I knew. Okay, thanks.
Is it Professor Ruckert or Ruckert?
Good.
Ruckert, okay.
Tim. I'm here because I tinkered around with tech. Early 80s, I started when I was a student at Munich, at the university there, and now I'm still, or again, tinkering around with tech, and I'm a professor in Munich, and Don thinks that I'm doing some interesting work, and I plan to use the tech engine to do the rendering for ebooks, where I think of an ebook as anything that changes its size and aspect ratio while you are looking at it, not like regular paper. So that's the project that I'm on, and Don hasn't actually seen very much of it, but he still thinks it's very interesting.
On text at any earlier time, or is this a new experience for you?
No, I started using tech in the early 80s when I ported parts of tech, namely the mathematical typesetting, to an optoelectronic printing machine that they had in a Munich-based company that no longer exists since the 90s or so.
Was a 1980s connection beside what you're doing now?
Yeah. Well, I didn't know Don at that time except through his books, and I got hold of a magnetic tape with tech on it, and I had it translated to Pascal and worked with that Pascal code in the 80s.
One of our historians, Matthew Kirschenbaum,
Yep. Hello, so I am one of your historians, and I'm very happy, privileged to be here. I work at the University of Maryland, and as Bert mentioned, I am editing the IEEE special issue on desktop publishing. I volunteered, or was volunteered. It was a kind of mutual process. And so I'd be very interested in talking with any of you who have ideas either for what ought to be in that issue or who ought to be in it. Don't be shy. And so my own work, I am an English professor by trade. My PhD is in literature. My work is really at the intersection of writing and technology. That's been my research interest for the last 20 years or so. And most recently, I've published a book called Track Changes, A Literary History of Word Processing, which several people in this room helped me with a great deal. So I suspect that's the primary reason that I'm here, and I'm looking towards some future projects in desktop publishing in addition to the special issue. So thank you.
Thomas Haig has joined us. Tom, would you turn your tent card around, please? We figure you know who you are. Thank you very much. Steve Kirsch.
Sure. Hi, I'm Steve Kirsch. I was the founder and CEO of Frame Technology Corporation, which created FrameMaker. We created it on Sun workstations. The connection was I had developed an optical mouse. Sun Microsystems was one of my first customers. I met John Gage there. John Gage introduced me to Charles Corfield. Corfield had gotten a free Sun workstation and wanted to do something interesting and created a kind of a prototype desktop publishing application. Interleaf was all of the rage at the time on the Sun workstations, and so we had this ambition that we could actually compete against this extremely well-funded company, and we did amazingly well. So the company was started July of 1986, and it sold about 6 years. Well, it went public, and then was acquired by Adobe for about $500 million or so at the time. And some things that people may not know, just for connections. I mean, I know a lot of people in the room, of course, but Charles Ying, Richard's brother, was an investor in, I'm not sure which company, it might have been Frame, but I used to go to the Charles' ski cabin. So it's a, kind of an interesting connection I just wanted to point out. And also, one of the early employees at Frame was David Fuchs, and David had worked on tech, and so bringing that into our system was helpful too. And Don, thank you for the $1. I found a bug in one of Don's books, and he used to write checks. If you get $1 if you found a problem in one of his books, and of course, none of those checks ever got cashed. They were always kept, and so I still have my check from The Art of Computer Programming and the bug on page. I don't forget which page it was, but.
Thank you,
Thursday
Steve.
morning, I wrote 17 checks.
Oh, wow. So, yeah, so that's kind of like my, one of the things I keep as a souvenir of those days. But it's really an honor to be here and to reconnect with people I haven't seen in many, many years.
Steve Lee.
Yes,
Keep moving it along.
Okay, I'm Lee Lorenzen. It is also an honor as well to be here. My connection to all of this, I guess, starts in two different forms. One is that I worked for Xerox. My first job out of college was actually working at Xerox Office Products Division. And I walked into this like 5th floor or whatever it was, 9th floor on Mockingbird Towers, and I saw an Alto and I saw a Xerox 8010, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's like I'm on another planet. It was just like, how can I sort of do some of these things more in the personal computer side of the world? Because I'd worked in a computer store in 1980 and with Apple II and Commodore PET and XD Sorcerer. So ultimately, went to digital research, and it was there that we worked on an early graphical operating system called Gem. It was based on something I did at Xerox called Lone Star, which was cloning the star on an 8086 PC. Got to visit PARC on the basis of the video around that, so it's a chance to meet some of my heroes there. So basically, after we had done Gem, we wanted to do an application on top of that, and we looked around, and all this, I think, had come out with PageMaker, and as we viewed it as kind of a short document publishing system, and we wanted to build a long document publishing system, and so we copied Scribe, which I think Interleaf was based on Scribe too. It was a batch formatting system that they had at Digital Research, and so we started Ventura, and that ultimately was, we turned around and licensed it. There were 4 of us that started the company, myself, John Meyer, Don Heiskell, and then John Grant, along with the secretary, and that was ever the entire company, because we actually licensed it back to Xerox, and they did everything else, and so we just got to do the software engineering, and that's what brought me here, I guess. Thanks.
Incidentally, we have time, you know, we're going to explore in depth every one of these things, so don't give away too many of the secrets. You have to have something to say tomorrow. Chuck Geschke.
Hi, I'm absolutely delighted to be here, and thank you, David and Bert, for putting this together. It's going to be a lot of fun, I can tell. Well, my father and grandfather were letterpress photo engravers, and my dad had 2 pieces of advice for me. Don't you ever go into the printing business, and don't play the stock market. I sort of obeyed him, but not quite. And the reason he didn't want me to go in the printing business, if you had ever been in a photo engraving shop, you saw what was a very toxic environment. Most photo engravers didn't make it past the age of 50. I was lucky my dad lived to be almost 99. I got a PhD in computer science. I got a job at the Xerox Research Center pretty early on. It was like the 2nd year that it was in operation. And I started working on a variety of different things. Not directly on anything to do with printing. And eventually I got the chance to start a new laboratory focused on printing and graphics. And I made one of the 2 great hiring decisions of my life. I hired John to be the chief scientist in the lab, and we worked together on a variety of different things, including at the request of Xerox development people. We designed a protocol called Interpress that would allow computers to talk directly to laser printers and eventually typesetting equipment in order to print out high-quality material. That involved Butler Lamson, who's also here, and a couple of other people. And the entire project was actually conducted on the early internet email systems, because we weren't physically all located in the same place. John and I got frustrated because we weren't able to see how Xerox was going to get this technology to the market, and so we decided to go off and start a business on our own. It was financed by a venture firm headed by Bill Hambrick of Hambrick and Quist, and we opened our doors, and here we are, 35 years later, and we've had a sort of wonderful experience, not only in the meeting that was set up with John Scull and John and myself and Paul, where the concept of desktop publishing was brought out as a marketing term, and that market, frankly, saved Apple in the late 80s. Lots more to say. Looking forward to this, and thank you for the invitation.
He hired you, so you have to look up to him. Is that part of the requirement of the job?
Always. I'm John Warnock. I am from Utah, and the reason I got involved with all of this is in 1966, David Evans, who was head of computers at Berkeley for a while, came to Utah to start a computer science department. And it was about man-machine communication, and it was financed by ARPA. And you will find there's a thread in everything that has to do with PARC about ARPA. All of the people in the ARPA centers around the country knew each other. We were focused on graphics. At Utah, we have some very distinguished graduates. There was Alan Kay, there was Jim Clark, there's Ed Catmull, who started Pixar, myself, William Newman, Martin Newell, sort of a lot, Bob Flagel, who also worked at PARC. A lot of people were associated with graphics. In 1978, I was working for Evans and Sutherland, and they wanted me to use back to Utah, and I didn't want to do that. And so I got to meet Chuck Geschke, and he hired me to come to Xerox PARC. And my goal at Xerox PARC was to make device-independent graphics. All of the graphics at PARC, or a majority of the graphics at PARC, were concerned with bitmaps, how you manipulate bitmaps, how you move them around very rapidly. There was very little, except with Patrick Baudelaire, there was very little work done on sort of analytic graphics, where you're using math equations to define them. So my job was to make the graphics move from device to device that were at different resolutions. As Chuck mentioned, we worked on Interpress, and it became clear. I'd only been at Xerox for 4 years, but it became very, very clear to me that Xerox never was going to capitalize on the work that was done at PARC. It just, and went into Chuck and said, look, this is the world's greatest sandbox. And it was. Xerox PARC was probably the best job any computer scientist could ever have. Most talented people, brightest people in the world. But we felt that there was a lot of opportunity, so we left and started Adobe. And it's done okay. Thank you.
Butler Lamson is next.
I'm Butler Lamson. My exposure to printing
Forward. If it's not right, if it's not red, it ain't hearing you.
was red.
Now it is.
It was red before, too. You just caught me at the pause. I worked on my high school newspaper, and it was printed on an old-fashioned printing press. And I got to visit the printer and see the linotype machines. I think that's what they were. And watch the metal flow and all that. And I guess from very shortly after that, when I started to get into computers and early in college, I said to myself, there's got to be a better way. So ever since then, I've had some amount of interest in publishing. When I was at Clean Corporation, very early 70, originally
Bring it
companies
closer.
that
There you go.
had various machines for photographically setting type. Yeah. But they all had been designed for pretty specialized purposes, and we never had an opportunity to, we could never quite see how to hook one of them up to the kinds of computer systems that we worked with and make a complete system that would be worth the effort. Then I came to PARC, and the charter for PARC was invent the office of the future. And nobody had any idea what that meant. The reason PARC got created was that the senior, Joe Wilson in particular, I think, that the head of Xerox, saw quite clearly that the halcyon period that Xerox was going through, where they had a monopoly on copiers, was not going to last forever. Patents would run out, competitors would come in, and they would have to have something else new and exciting, or their wonderful growth story would come to an end. And something having to do with offices seemed like a good idea, so they started PARC and they said, invent the office of the future. That didn't give us unlimited license to do anything we wanted, but it gave us pretty broad license. And then we were also very fortunate to have Gary Starkweather come from Xerox Rochester with his ideas for laser printing. And so there we were, all of us, most of us who were in the computer part of PARC had been very interested in interactive computing, and it seemed very natural to go into graphics and build word processors like Bravo and so forth. And then in addition to that, we had the laser printers. And so we also got to, but laser printers in those days were fairly large, clunky, expensive devices. So we also got to invent client-server computing because you had to share the printer among many, many users. Desktop publishing per se, I think, was never a focus at PARC. We were into offices. And later, to some extent, we were into computer printing because Xerox went into the computer printing business at the high end in a fairly big way. And that is quite a bit different than what you do in offices. But there are many aspects of publishing that we just never got into. I think it's probably for the same reason that we never got into spreadsheets, is that we didn't really have any use for it. We were perfectly happy laying things out on 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper and publishing tech reports that were bound in the standard way and stapled along the spine. And that was just fine. And the other issue, I guess, was that we didn't really have at PARC, we had the laser printers, but they were actually not wonderful devices for publishing because John and Chuck probably know in detail technically why this is. The character shapes that were made on the 500 DPI original laser printer didn't reproduce very well. The original looked fine, but they didn't reproduce very well. And if you photographed it and reproduced it, that didn't work very well either. So it wasn't really a very good vehicle for publishing. And so most of what you're going to hear about in this meeting, I think, is going to be things that happened after that.
Which is great, but we're going to hear also what happened during that as well. Bob Sproul.
I hope so. That's my job, or as I see it. So I'm a failed physicist. I got lured into the computer business as an undergraduate at Harvard when I got an opportunity to take Ivan Sutherland's course. He had just come there as an associate professor. And a bunch of us traipsed down and interviewed to get in. He had a PDP-1, which he had snared from the Air Force, which was all ours. And we had it day and night, just as you had your UNIVAC one. It was a very large personal computer, but quite marvelous. We also had William Newman, who was a fresh PhD from England and came with his thing called the reaction handler. We were working primarily on interactive graphics things, but Ivan had a research project to build a head-mounted display with real-time perspective line drawings. Don't even think raster yet, please. So these are all line drawings, and so he hired me to work several summers and goodness knows how many hours to help design the hardware and build some software, and there was a happy little band doing that. But I must say, in addition to that, so that secured my future in computing. But in addition to that, I also was interested in topography and publishing. I had set hot and cold type for a school newspaper, including dropping my first tray of linotype slugs, much to the consternation of the real printers. I never did that again, because I don't think I ever touched another tray of linotype slugs again. As Butler said, there had to be a better way. I think that's what you said. But also, for example, even on the PDP-1, we didn't use it for any graphics in producing the college yearbook, but we did use it for that. You know that annoying part in the seniors section where they list all the clubs they're part of? Some poor soul had to typeset that. And I took pity on them and wrote the obvious computer program to work from a bunch of coded data and essentially a database to produce an MTST type so that cold type could produce that. It didn't need to be any better. So at any rate, with this as background, and I also then wrote an early device independence graphics package, got interested in scan conversion because of the Utah work, and various visitors of graduate students, including Alan Kay, came to visit Ivan, and got interested in curve representations, again being done by the Utah guys. But I arrived at PARC in Christmas '72 and was part of a happy little band called the Graphics Group. Bob Flagle, Patrick Baudelaire, Dick Schaup, a bunch of others. And it was clear, as Butler said, we weren't building desktop publishing systems. We were building an experimental office automation system or office information system. And the key there wasn't so much depth as breadth, but to try to explore the various systems questions about putting together a large and somewhat varied system to do the various things that we imagined an automated office might want to do. So as a result, the issue was to kind of populate the space with experimental hardware and software that would teach us something. So one of the things we did early on, fairly early, about 4, was design a thing called Press, which was the precursor to Interpress. It was device independent, but as John pointed out, we didn't have a clue how to do a good job of rendering it on many devices. But it proved a very good research vehicle for both producing the software that created such files and producing some software that printed such files and manipulated them. It was a page description language. At any rate, there will be plenty of opportunity to hear more about that. But I noticed that everybody likes a little story, so I'll tell you the little story. So we did some fonts. We had Helvetica, Times Roman. As we knew that if Xerox was going to turn into going to do products, we had to do some experiments. But even years later, bicycling around Palo Alto, I would see pieces of paper tacked up on telephone poles, and I could tell that it had slipped out of our control because the lowercase r in Helvetica Bold had a serious width error. And you could tell it at 100 feet away. And so no claims to beauty should ever be ascribed to the stuff we did. I must say one other connection, since we're into connections. I left PARC in '77 and went to Carnegie Mellon as a faculty member. I was actually the last man standing as Brian Reed's thesis supervisor on Scribe. And at the time, the Carnegie Mellon Computer Science Department didn't think very highly of either graphics or page layout, but we got it through.
Thank you, Bob. Steve Walden is next.
Yeah, hi. I've been interested in printing since my mother, an elementary school teacher, used Ditto Masters, and I loved their smell. And then I spent my 4 years of college, supported myself working as unskilled labor around a 4-color giant Mealy lithograph. I then spent 30 years in the computer communications systems business, starting with the ARPANET. When I was retired from BB&N about 20 years ago, I got involved in computing history and writing books and self-publishing books. I think I'm here because I'm on the editorial board of the Annals, and I've been involved in several special issues. So if I can be of aid in that, I'm ready. And for the past 10 years, probably, my area of researching computer history has tended to be the history of digital typography. And one last thing. And I'm planning to write an events and sightings piece about this meeting to go in the Annals issue right after that, sort of forecasting that there will eventually, hopefully, be a special issue.
Thank you very much. Dave is a tremendous assistant to us in planning the meeting, and he did an incredible job of taking over as the editor of the Annals when they had some problems with the then current editor, and rebuilt up the whole backlog of stuff so that they had terrific issues because of him. Thomas Haig.
Hey, so I'm a historian of computing at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. I started out in computer science, but I made a slightly perverse career decision, and for my PhD, switched over to history.
Get a little closer, would you, please?
All right. So I've worked on many aspects of the history of computing. History of databases, history of business use and management of computing, etc. The place where you are most likely to have seen my name is on the historical reflections columns in Communications of the ACM, which I've been writing for about 5 years now. I was chair for many years of the group SIGSIS for Historians of Computing and Information Technology. And that's kind of grown into a nice, vibrant community. So if any of you have a more general interest in the history of computing, you can sign up for that. We have an active listserv and a number of resources online. That's www.sigsis.org. I recently published the book ENIAC in Action. That's a slightly older time period, so unfortunately those people aren't still around. So it's nice to have this kind of shift of gears and to see you all still, lively and very much alive. No, you look good to me. And I've been working on Bert's various events for, it must be more than 15 years now, Bert.
Just as an aside, Tom was over here going to the University of Pennsylvania. He's a Brit, as you can tell by his accent. And we wanted him to stay here, and he wanted to stay, but he was on a Fulbright scholarship, if I have it correctly. And the rules of the Fulbright is you go back to where you came from, because that's what the whole idea was. And we didn't want him to go back. And so we talked to senators and a variety of other people. We kept him, we gave him a job one summer doing work for us on, at the Charles Babbage Institute, I believe. He went there in Minnesota. And fortunately, we were able to swing enough. And he's been here at the University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee. He's the most prolific writer I have ever seen. And what's even more important, it's readable, understandable, and very well researched and supported. So that's my encomium for for
Yeah.
Dr. Haig. So.
Yeah, thanks, Burton. My most direct connection with this academically is that at an earlier event on the history of word processing, I wrote the article for that special issue, remembering the Office of the Future. I was kind of stealing the Xerox line, and that has turned out to be one of my more widely cited pieces. And strangely, it also connected me with media theorists in Germany. So that's led me to a second job at the University of Siegen. So it's kind of strange the twists that careers take. On a personal level, I grew up liking writing as well as computers, so I was always like producing various kinds of magazines. I couldn't afford any Apple things as a teenager, so I was working on an Atari ST. But then a little bit later, I used an early version of PageMaker on Windows in 1990, and Corel Draw. Adobe Type Manager was like an amazing thing when that came out. And later on, as a student, I was using FrameMaker on Sun to edit the departmental magazine. So these events have now been going on long enough that the history is actually like catching up for the first time with the things that I can remember personally.
Thank you so much, Tom.
As a media theorist, this is a great opportunity for me to talk. I've asked many people this question, but I've never been able to understand the answer.
Oh, I'm going to refer you to Matthew Kirschenbaum for that one.
I sense evasion.
Bring the subject up at the appropriate time. John Scull is next.
Hi, I'm John. First, thanks, Bert, Dave, Jonathan. This is great. It's great to see everybody. I come to this from my experience at Apple Computer. This was a very interesting early part of my working career, so it's great to be here. I started at Apple, part of the Mac team, prior to the launch of the Macintosh. Steve was my boss's boss. There were others here that also worked at Apple. But as you know, Steve was kind of left in 1985, left the company, and kind of the Mac division was dissolved. And they asked me to look at how we could kind of revive and kind of get the laser writer, heading the right direction. It had started off reasonably well, but it pretty much plummeted to almost no sales about 6 months after it was launched, and it was kind of a pretty dire time at Apple. Besides the situation with Steve leaving, morale at Apple was terrible. The Macintosh wasn't selling very well. The Mac Office, which was kind of our new marketing thing, was not doing well. It was a pretty dire time. And so because of some of the discussions that I had with some of the people here, Paul, Jonathan, Chuck, and John, and later got to know Liz, I went around and talked to a bunch of people. We can talk about it more tomorrow, but it became pretty clear that Apple could not do it just the old way that we had been doing it, which was we sell personal computers. We had this unique opportunity I thought was going to be massive. It took about 6 weeks talking to people. It became pretty apparent to me that it was just a jewel that just needed to be, kind of brought into the world, and I like doing stuff like that. And so just luck, right place, right time. So we can talk more about that, but So I became the original, desktop publishing and marketing manager at Apple. And I ran that for about 3.5 years, till it was a pretty sizable part of Apple's business. And so I'm sure we'll talk about that more, but that's kind of my connection here.
Thank you, John. Larry Tesler.
1SLER.
I kept spelling it wrong, thank you.
I got into this publishing thing around early days, around 1968. I was pasting up a magazine for an organization, nonprofit I was involved with, and noticing that this operation that we kept repeating about taking an X-Acto knife and cutting a little course description for our catalog, and then using glue to stick it to the paper was kind of going to be obsoleted by stuff like Space War, where you can get it up on the screen in front of you and interact with it. And I told this to my fellow who was doing paste up with me, whose name was Jim Warren, and he was a math teacher at a local high school, but he didn't really know anything about computers. So I brought him up to the AI lab to see that, and that got him into computing, and he started the West Coast Computer Fair and a magazine and so on, and got a lot going on in that side of the business. And I went and at the Stanford AI lab, I was getting skeptical that AI was going to go anywhere for the next 50 years, and I should do something that people are actually going to use. And so in discussion I had with Les Ernest, who turned out was a typesetting buff, and actually went into the business a few years later. He wanted me to develop a formatting program that he called it the document compiler, that was basically a markup language, and to implement a lot of frame maker type of features, building indexes and numbering cross-references automatically and stuff like that. And so I did a project at the Stanford AI lab called Pub. In just a few months, I had something going that used an ALGOL-like language that was popular at Sail, and the language was called Sail. And so Pub was kind of a subset of Sail that worked with text instead of numbers. And it started getting used by people around the ARPANET, who were particularly grad students doing their PhD thesis. For a lot of people, it was an adequate solution. Up to that time, I was in a business that doing application software for people that lived in or worked in the Palo Alto area. And one thing that I was known for was making easy-to-use software, and I was very proud of it. In the middle of my pub development, I got visited by a fellow from Berkeley who said he'd heard about the project, and he wanted to convince me to change the names of all the commands to the ones that were in his program. And I said, I don't want to do that. They're not parsimonious. I mean, you have a command that turns on indentation, and then the opposite of it turns off indentation. It ought to be something which implies that it's the opposite of the thing with indentation. And he said, I'm in real trouble on this product. It's almost done. It's important that there be a standard set of terms, and you're coming along here and you might screw everything up. And he put a lot of pressure on me, and I got convinced to change all my names to these unmemorable names. And those of you and there are a few here, I think, who used Pub, know that it turned into a not very good user experience. but the weaknesses of it inspired people, and Rich Johnson at Carnegie Mellon did Scribe, which was a usable version of Pub, and then of course Don did Techt. So those became important, and for various reasons Pub faded away. But it helped me get a job at PARC, and at PARC I got to work on publishing with Ginn & Company, that was a publishing subsidiary, textbook publisher of Xerox. And then at Apple, I got to work on as a tool supplier to the developers of CompuGraphics personal composition system, it was called, on the Lisa. And again, that was something that failed immediately upon coming to market. But my tool set got used and ported to the Mac and was used for doing Photoshop. So I got involved in little bits along the way in the different aspects of publishing, particularly memorably modeless text editing and the copy-paste model of modeless editing.
Larry, thank you very much. Paul McJones.
Hi. In 1961, in junior high, I learned the California job case and hand set the Gettysburg Address, and that was my main exposure to real printing. College, I took operating system classes from Butler Lamson, worked with him briefly on a time-sharing system, and so then in the mid-70s, 76, when I got an opportunity to go to work at Xerox, which is where Butler was, I jumped at that and worked on the operating system for the 8010 Xerox Star, but that wasn't printing. But I was exposed, I was using Bravo as if it were FrameMaker or Ventura Publisher to create things like large technical publishing. I think the reason I'm here is I'm a friend of Burt, and for about 14 years I've been trying to collect historic software source code for the museum, things like the Xerox Alto software, which Xerox very kindly made available to the museum, and the museum's Al Caso managed to do a whole bunch of rescue work years ago. While I was at Adobe for a few years, I actually put together an archive, it's internal to Adobe, of historic software from many of the earliest versions of PostScript, Photoshop, Illustrator, well, not so much Illustrator, and a few of the other apps. I hope maybe someday John and Chuck will be able to donate PostScript 1.0 to the museum.
Thank you, Paul. Paul's been a big help to us in a lot of areas, including helping to plan on this and for many of our other meetings, and real contributor to the museum. Mr. Seybold, I'm going to keep you brief, remember, because they all know you.
Yes, okay, so
I can shut this off, remember, when he talks.
I remember vividly. My roots in publishing come from the fact that my father was director of the printing industries of Philadelphia, later Delaware Valley, as I was growing up. So I had all this stuff coursing through all the time. My first exposure to computers was senior year in college, 1963, 64. I did my thesis, required using a computer for it, CAD computer time at 2 o'clock in the morning at RCA in facility in New Jersey. And then I went to graduate school the next year. While I was doing this, my father had founded a company called Rocapi, which we'll talk about later, which was the first commercial typesetting company. And I realized my first year in graduate school that it had dawned on me that economics was going a direction I didn't want it, I felt very uncomfortable with. And I began looking around and began to realize that the thing I could find that made a huge difference for both democracy and
Sit back just a little bit, Jonathan.
for both democracy and for a free economy was the exchange of information. And at that time, this meant publishing, either in print or in video or something of this sort, which was expensive, time-consuming, used all these craft industries, all this mess we've talked about, and was in the hands of relatively few companies. So there's this high barrier to communication. And I realized that we had the chance to take computer technology and use that to help people communicate and get rid of all this crap. And I had a really strong feeling that computers were going to get better and better and better. We could start with text, but we're going to get to images, we're going to get to pictures, motion pictures, the whole lot. So here was a chance to stop what I was doing, to change course, and to be part of a really significant revolution. And that was just compelling to me, and that's what I did. First at Rocapi, then at Seybold seminars, then Seybold publications, then Seybold seminars. We'll talk about that later. But really, in June 1965, I set out with a sort of a vision that I could be part of something, and I spent the next 30, 35 years doing exactly that.
Thank you, Jonathan. Richard Ying.
I think that I'm older than you, Bert, in the sense that what we did at ATEX was, I think, before this program, well, it's not desktop publishing. So, in a way, I'm sort of a prehistory, if this is the history of desktop publishing. So that is very old. ATEX was 3 of us. My brother, Charles, I, and Doug Drain from the company. We didn't have anything better to do, got out of school, so we said we'll build a company. So, of course, you know, I'm the most important of the company, and for 2 reasons. One is that the other 2 are not here to defend themselves. And the second one is that I was doing software, and you guys know, of course, that is the hardest part. And for that reason, they keep me in the back room, and they did the visionary thing. As a business, Doug can see the what the whole society is going towards. And he has grand visions, and he has been spending like the last 30, 40 years doing very strange things that I don't understand. So I won't go into that. But one of the things he saw was that computers can be used by normal human beings instead of professionals who do typing. Typing, or compositors, or by whatever name, was sort of like the word computers another 20 years before that. Computers, as we see now by popular movies, we now understand that they used to refer to a group of people who sit in the back room and do math. Typing was, back in the old prehistory days, was professionals who did nothing but type on typewriters. Doug says that human beings can do that. And of course, you know, I disagreed, but then who am I? But he said to do it, and we did that. So in a way, the strongest significance, the biggest significance of ATEX was that we did the pioneering work to get journalists who are semi-human to use the computers to type into, directly set type, into the system and be used to output type. I remember our first newspaper installation at the Long Island, what's the paper called?
Newsday.
Newsday, right, thank you. At Newsday, an editor came up to me and said, the last time they did automation on us, pointing to his colleagues' automated system. See that, those computers, it was the IBM Selectric. And he pointed to his computer, his terminal, which was the Remington. I threw that out the window. By then, we had installed our system. Then he was threatening to throw our computer terminal out the window. So I picked up the keyboard, unplugged it from the back, and threw it out the window. He didn't know that, you know, that was just a keyboard. It was mechanical. It won't break.
Went back down there, pulled it up, stuck it in the terminal. Says, go ahead. You can do that all day. So a few weeks later, after we got the system up and running, I saw him typing away on that. So I think Doug was right. Human beings can type directly into the computers. So that was, I think, the
Connection.
the significance that we made before the.
Yeah, this will be in our session there in the 70s, because ATEX is a bridge. But that newspaper work that goes on in the 70s, it doesn't lead directly, but in effect, it was the same kinds of things, used some of the same concepts, structures, and technologies. And it was one of the decisions we made with Jonathan's help, is that there's a whole prehistory of your 60s and 70s before this. That set the stage for what you, in a sense, technologically, for a lot of what happened on later. Thank you.
Another story I like to relate.
You know, he's getting into your coffee time. Just so you understand.
Sorry. It is the sponsorship. Jonathan's dad, John, came up to visit us after we tried to sell our first initial system. My partners, Doug and my brother Charles, and we want to convince the U.S. News and World Report that we actually know how to do these things. So we have a CRT monitor, keyboard that we borrowed, and it doesn't look like much, because if you know the old CRT monitor, it was a tube with electronics. We have no housing around it. So I put a cardboard box around it, spray painted, put the name, some kind of ATEX on the side. And the senior editor of production from the U.S. News and World Report came up, and he looked at this, and said, Richard, that's a cardboard box. Yes, it's a cardboard box. That's our mock-up. The real one will look great. Of course, we didn't make too big an impression, but John stood up and said, yes, these guys can actually build that system. And I scratched my head. How do you know? That
You did.
we did, and it was John who had the confidence in us that really got us started. So,
Thank you, Richard. We are obviously running a little behind schedule, but I think this is, remember, this is for the record purposes. You guys know some of this, but we have a record. When people read this, they know who you are, and they know that it may be 50 years from now. That's fine. And I won't even be around then, in spite of what people are afraid of. I'm going to ask the people from the outside to go to the mic over there, please. Start with you, Doug Jerger. There's a mic over there. You see it? Would you go there? Thank you. So we're stretching this session a bit, and we'll make up for it. I'm going to cut into David's time later on. No big deal.
Do the same kind of thing? Is that your thought?
Doug Jerger, about 3 seconds worth.
Yeah, that's what I figured, yeah. Doug Jerger. I started in this business April Fool's Day of 1970. We had $300 between three of us, and we decided we were going to make mainframe IBM software for financial applications. Well, eventually, we actually did, and we ended up with its mainframe stuff. So you guys, are not excited about it necessarily, but it was online real-time systems, IMS DBDC. This is in the mid-70s. And companies like Exxon Chemical, Roman Haas, Hershey Chocolate, Nestle's, Mars. In fact, we had 5 largest sellers of candy bars in the world were product acquirers. We sold that product for about $200,000, which was a tough sell back then because folks weren't quite so sure what software was. Standard Oil of Ohio, they also bought it. So that's where I got into the business and eventually involved with lots of things and ran into Bert at Adapso in the trade association business and got involved with the history project that he is part of and a couple of other folks here in the late 90s, early 2000s. So if you have materials, as he mentioned before, if you have materials you'd like to share with the historians and future generations, let me know and we'll see if we can get some information, get it together and get it to the museum.
He's been a tremendous help over the years. He's been part of the software industry SIG and been a good friend for quite a long time. Thank you for helping out with this. And who we got back there? John Schock, come talk.
Good morning, I'm John Schock. Very briefly, it's often said, and Don is an example of this, that a lot of computer people overlap with music, but I think in this audience it's clear that the computer people overlap with their college newspapers, because I started out working on the Stanford Daily with long nights of on the MTST, editing, cutting, pasting, sending proofs off, and you learn very quickly that that's not a very great thing to do. The other thing happened at Stanford is I took a class from a guy named Alan Kay, and I was a bit of a wise guy, and at the end of it, Alan was giving me a hard time about something, or I was giving him a hard time, and he said, by the way, what are you doing this summer? And I said, I don't have any plans. And he said, well, Xerox is starting a research lab. Do you want a summer job? And I stayed 14 years. So I worked with Alan, got to work on Ethernet worm programs, many different things. My thesis was done on Bravo. Thank you all who made that possible. It was printed on Dover with a little bit of a battle with Stanford that they told me it had to be in a fixed pitch font and it had to look like Courier, and I had a little negotiation that I said I didn't think that was a sensible thing to do. I later went on to the business side. I ended up I worked for the CEO at corporate headquarters. I was president of the Office Systems Division, so the first generation Xerox Star and the second generation Xerox 85, publishing systems, office systems, Japanese document systems. As I left, there was an effort to go down market into the desktop publishing business with a single workstation and a single small laser printer. It was sort of too little too late from my point of view. I got fed up, as we all did eventually, and got frustrated, and I left. So I tell people I have a long career and a very short resume. A third of it at Xerox, 2/3 of it in the venture capital business. One of the first things I did in the venture capital business was to go visit a guy named Steve Kirsch in his apartment, who showed me a prototype of a Sun-based word processing, document processing system. And I had so much scar tissue from Xerox. And I remember I asked you don't remember this, I'm sure, Steve. I asked you, I was testing to see how deep the program was, because I knew how complicated the problems were. And I asked him yet if he had leader dots. Some of you know what leader dots are. And he looked at me and said, what's a leader dot? And I said, I'm not investing in this company. It was one of many mistakes I've made in my life.
John Schock.
I'm also on the board of the Computer History Museum, and thank you all for coming.
John, thank you so much.
I can answer that question now.
Just a question to you guys at Xerox.
Innovation when we announced leader dots at a user group, and that's how crazy it was.
You're not on mic. Was Dave Kearns the president at that point in time, chairman?
Yes, he was. I worked for Dave.
Okay, because Dave was my boss at IBM, about 4 levels removed. Next, I'm going to go around there. John Markoff.
So my career as a journalist has crossed all of the inflection points in the presentation of text. And I was working at my college newspaper in Whitman in 1968, and I would take the copy to the Wall-to-Wall Union Bulletin, and the guys who handled hot lead would mark it up. And I went away and I became the editor of that paper, and I came back in the fall and all of the printers were gone. They'd been sold off to a little paper in Oregon, and they'd been replaced by women who are working at selectric typewriters, probably offset printing. Now my current project is a biography of Stuart Brand, who I think is sort of in the thread here. The Whole Earth Catalog was an important sort of step in publishing at a certain point in the late 1960s. He was also the first person to use the term personal computing in the modern sense of the word in his book, Two Cybernetic Frontiers. So looking forward to the project.
John, thanks for joining us. Hanson, your turn.
Hi, my name is Hanson Su. I'm a curator here at the Museum Center for Software History. And one of the younger people in the room, I got into computers through the Macintosh. I've been a Mac fan ever since. Got our first Mac Plus. I was really into fonts. So thank you all for getting me into this field. Because of that, I got a degree, an EECS degree at Berkeley, joined Apple, worked there testing Mac OS X for 6 years. I left Apple in 2005 to study history, got my master's at Stony Brook, and then went on to Cornell to study sociology and history of technology, where I finished my dissertation on third-party Apple software developers 2 years ago. Thank you.
Hanson, works with
Yeah, I work with
David here.
David.
You might as well mention him, it's okay.
Yeah, I work with David Brock. He's
And
my
this is
boss.
part of the Center for Software History, which has just become an what's a year and a half or so? It's just a tremendous thing. The focus here at the museum, and I think Len has had this in the back of his mind for a long, long time, instead of just boxes and equipment, we now are talking about paper and people and software, and not just the physical software, but also the stories about it, which we just love. Let's keep going. Ann Hardy. She's the co-chair of the Software Industry Special Interest Group now. Is that too high for you?
Well, see if you can hear me. Well, thank you for the introduction, Bert. I got into computers. I am not an expert in the field that you all are experts in, but I did get into computers back at IBM in 1956. So I've been at this for a while. I started with IBM 704, 705. Eventually, the Stretch, where I wrote was on the team that wrote the Fortran compiler. Then I moved over to Livermore, where I wrote the Fortran compiler all over again for Livermore. And then I came over here to Timeshare, which was 1966, where I was the one who adapted the Berkeley operating system to Timeshare and the SDS 940. I spent many years there in doing a variety of projects, including things like online airplane reservations in the 1970s, online banking in the late 70s, early 80s. We used to travel around a lot, and we could, as early as the late 70s, make our own plane reservations wherever we were, so we could come home whenever we wanted to. This is no intervention with travel agents, just directly to the airlines. So that interesting, really pioneer work at Timeshare. After that, I did a lot of work with secure systems, a lot of work with privacy, and worked on and then ran a company that worked with Sun on several different contracts, including the financial services electronic check program. So again, much emphasis on privacy and transactions in the industry.
Thank you, Ann. Who have I got next here? Ed LaHaye, another very active member of the Software Industry Special Interest Group, and has been in the computer field for 100 years, as I did.
Hello, my name is Ed LaHaye. I have the pretentious title of being project manager for this conference. That translates into do whatever Bert thinks I should do. My background is in computer software. Mostly in the applications area and tools to build applications. But I've done everything you can do. I've built it, I've broken it, I've fixed it, I sold it, I've installed it, and I've managed projects and people that do that. And I'm impressed of being in such an august company of people.
Thank you, Ed. You used to be a big help for all of us. And last but not, very much not least, Len Shustic has screwed up my whole seating system. He didn't sit where I told him to. So.
You didn't tell me where to sit, so I sat anywhere I wanted to.
No, I haven't. Len Shustic, please.
Yeah, you'll hear more from me later, so I'm actually not going to say very much now. Bert has me talking over lunch, so I'll do that. My connection to this field was, number one, I never worked on my school newspaper, so I'm an outlier. The most close product that I was involved in, or non-product, was actually when I was a graduate student at Stanford under Forrest Basket. I designed and built a low-cost, high-resolution, at the time, 640 by 480 video graphics terminal, which was quite successful, except we weren't able to make it a product because neither Forrest and I knew anything about making products and starting companies at the time. This was about 1974. But my office mate, a couple of years later, Andy Bechtelsheim, actually did managed to do something similar with better hardware and better software and make a successful company out of it. So he was a role model for me. But you'll hear more from me later. Thank you, Bert and David, for organizing this great panel, and all of the rest of you for participating.
Let's not let him off quite that easy. He's been the chairman of the museum here. He's the one who brought all 17 truckloads of equipment from Boston to the Moffett Field here. 1997, was it? Oh, it just shows how my memory is going. That's it. And has run the museum. It's an incredible institution. For those of you who don't know it, get to know it. They've done an unbelievable job here, and it's become the focal point for so much of what's happened in the industry.